All right. And we're back. I need some better tagline. I watch Rust, or I play Rust the game, and I watch a bunch of Rust content creators, and they are always starting off with, naked on the beach or something interesting. I should probably come up with like a interesting tagline, but for now, we don't have it. Welcome back again, though. Um, in our last stream, so 2 nights ago, I said I was going to broadcast last night. And while I was ready to, I had a bunch of issues with one of the nodes because I'm in the phase now where I got the new node up, which is PVE C1, which is the one we did the setup on the other day. And then PVE 2 was always going to be one of the two existing ProxMox nodes that we had up and running in the little 2 node cluster that we were running. The challenge I have is I just don't have unlimited resources and I don't have a vendor supporting me right now. That said, Dell, Supermicro, anybody wants to support the home lab, I'm more than willing to take it. Cisco, network gear, Unify, like I'm wide open. I'm wide open to test your gear and show people how we're using it. But anyways, all that aside, um, so what we're doing tonight is we're gonna finish doing the networking on PVEC1, and we're gonna do the same thing on PVE2. I wanted PVEC2 up. Yeah, I'm just gonna mess all this up, I think, tonight. Um, PVEC2. I wanted it up so we could actually bring the cluster up as part of this, because just doing the basic networking and getting the backups and stuff isn't all that. I'm going to show you guys a couple things we've done in a minute and what things kind of look like, so you understand where we're going. But this is the end state tonight. We can zoom in. I've got the VLANs segmented out into these blocks. These are all VLANs. I can probably do something here real quick to kind of color those in just to give you guys a little bit better representation. These are going to be the VLANs. There's other VLANs involved in this as well, but those are VLANs like the network that we're going to do the public interfaces on for the actual VMs. That's going to ultimately end up being 10.1.10, I think it is. We can go look at our network map here if it reloads real quick. So production, yeah, 10.1.10. But we're not going to talk about it tonight because we're not bringing up any VMs on that. There's also going to be the IPMI. We talked a little bit about that the other day, but that is totally independent of ProxMox. That's on the BMC controller or the management controller on the motherboard. So those don't really matter right now. But this is our goal tonight. These are the VLANs. I've just kind of scattered them out so our network lines don't look crazy. I had done kind of a 2 to 4 node migration diagram over here on the left. You could just kind of barely see, and it was horrible. So we'll leave it at that. The other thing I'm going to try to get a Wacos tablet, or Wacom tablet, sorry, so we can do some sketchy and stuff as things kind of hop up here in the future. But yeah, I got to get all that set up and we'll do that later. But anyways, here's tonight's goal. So with that, let's jump over to the actual lab stuff. And if you look, this is our service catalog. A couple things have changed. One, I've moved PVEC 1 and 2. PVEC 2 didn't exist last time. Instead, it was PVE 2. I've also brought a Synology up. That's a whole nother story. But since I turned up the lab, occasionally I would get IP addressing, DHCP addressing from the home network back in Ohio before we moved. And the Synology had been doing that. So I had plugged the Synology in. I didn't know it had powered on, and it was just sitting in VLAN 1. So it was causing a little bit of havoc. And then last night, I thought, I'm going to go figure out what's going on with that Synology, get some personal backups going and stuff again. And boom, there it was. There's this whole lab's worth and house worth of IP addressing from the house back in Ohio 8 years ago. So we got all that killed and resolved that problem that I've been fighting with. So we've added it. We've moved a couple things over, but mostly we've just added new things. I'm going to move a couple things just so they can be seen. The only thing other than that that's new, and I think this was on here the other night, but we didn't talk about it. This is a local AI based on Llama 2, and it's kind of cool. That's a whole another program for another time, but it's just a cool little local AI. It's actually running on my computer because my computer is the only thing that has a GPU on it. But with that said, let's get into the lab. That's why you're all here. So first we're going to go to the old cluster. So if we go to the old cluster, you're going to see that PVE2 is down. That box no longer exists in its previous form. It is now PVEC2. I've done all the config and everything, all the initial install that you guys in the last stream went through with me for PVEC1 on PVEC2. The reason it was a problem yesterday is it doesn't have the same drive configurations as PVEC1. They're the older cloud boxes that I've talked about. I think they're the Dell C 24 TTYs or something like that, an old cloud host. But anyways, neither here nor there. I had to do some goofiness there. I think I'm going to fix it later. I've got a bunch of older small SSDs like T56 and 512s hanging around from other projects in the past. I think I'm going to crack the cases on these eventually and actually put an SSD boot volume or two if I can. I think there's enough SATA headers open on those boxes to actually do two internal. And within SSD drives with very little read-write on them, they should be small enough and cool enough to sit inside that 1U housing. But anyways, couldn't do that. And because of that, I tried a couple things. I tried to get it to boot off of a USB drive, and I fully corrupted a brand new 64 gig USB drive. I'm still not sure how I did that, but it won't do anything now. And then above and beyond that, I've tried a couple other things. But what we ended up with was just having to sacrifice one of the three bigger drives, at least for now, as an LVM volume, and I'll show you all that to get it up and running and to bring it part of the cluster. So with that down, all of this stuff, you notice there's no VMs here at this point. And that is because before we did it, we migrated everything over to PVE1. So now PVE1 is running as a single node cluster. That's not good. I can't start anything. If I lose it, I'm going to lose command and control to it and a whole bunch of other things. The good news is every single thing on here, other than logs for things like the Kemp load balancer and for Pi-hole 1, everything else is fully backed up. The logs on those we could potentially lose, but I'm not super stressed out about that. We're also continuing to run our backups on all of these. And so they're getting backed up to the ProxMox backup server, which we'll talk about and show tonight. And if we have time, we'll do a restore from the ProxMox backup server into the new cluster. So this is a single node cluster. There's a lot of danger. We're definitely in danger Will Robinson territory on that guy. And I've shut most of it down because I want to be able to start bringing things up once we move to the other one and get them migrated. And when we're done and we're sure everything's up and everything's healthy, we will just turn this one down, and off stream, I will just go ahead and install ProxMox on it, and it'll become PVEC3. And then we'll talk later about what PVEC4 is going to be. I got to mess with that one. But eventually, I think the backup server, we're going to take it and burn it down because it's a pretty beefy host, and we're going to make it node 4. And then we're going to do some interesting things to make the backup server on a dedicated volume that nobody has access to, and we're going to pin it to that host. Then that host's memory and extra storage and stuff then becomes accessible to the cluster, so we can do extra things in the cluster, and we have two beefy newer hosts in the cluster. But anyways, that's down the road. That's just me kind of foreshadowing. So we're gonna minimize everything for these guys. We might reference it back from time to time, so we'll leave it up. But let's start by looking at PVEC1 here. So this is the one we did live on the last stream. I think it was stream 5. I'm going to try to this weekend get some notes and stuff and update all the YouTube with, what the series is and get all that. And then I've already got the blog posts about what the actual lab looks like, what's in it, what our purpose are with it and stuff like that. That's already mostly done. I just got to go through and clean it up before I actually post it. And then I'll post it to all the channels like LinkedIn and LinkedIn and Twitter, and I'll also probably do some lightweight posting on TikTok about that. So yeah, with that said, we're going to pick up where we left off last night. And I'm going to try to split screen this to the best of my ability and still make this work. Because this is my reference. And I'm not going to worry about all the VLANs right now. I can see them over here, and I know this probably isn't optimal for you guys, but we're going to start with this. So we're going to go to PVEC1. We're going to choose that out of the data center. Yeah, this probably isn't going to work. So I am just going to move my reference over to my other screen. Sorry that you guys can't see it. And it's covering up my actual feed for the stream. So yeah, everything looks good there. So we'll just leave it like that. All right. So with that said, the other night we got this set up. We end up setting up the repositories, getting them all to the non-production ones, the non-enterprise ones, updating the host, rebooting it. We've done the same thing on PVEC2. I'll show you so you know there's no like smoke and mirrors going on behind. We'll go to PVEC2. And we're going to go to network. Same thing. We have the Linux bridge up. That's it. That Linux bridge has an address that is in VLAN 1, which you guys can't see, but that is the management network. This Linux bridge is also going to act as, at least for now, the actual, we had talked about VM interface, so the VMs can get to public. That'll be sitting on another VLAN. I do want to point out a couple of things here as we do this. The other day when we did a bunch of the networking and getting prep for this, we talked about VLAN aware, and I had mentioned that I needed to do more digging on that, and I did. I did some of that last night because I wanted to be able to talk about this at least briefly. So again, not from an expert level, but at least from a semi-knowledgeable perspective. The reason, let's start with why we're talking about it. So I have .1Q trunks going from my switches up to all my interfaces. And then we're tagging the interfaces, or at least this interface. We're tagging this interface as native VLAN, or the untagged VLAN, I think that's right, on most vendors, native on Cisco. And that means that VLAN 1, this will just natively communicate across it. And then when we go do a, here I can show you, when we go and we do a create VM, sorry, this is a little off the beaten path here, but I want to show you all. When we get to, you know what, I'm not going to be able to easily do this. It's going to stop me before we get there. Long story short, when you go into this network field, there's a place for a VLAN tag if you want to tag it. And everything I had initially read said if you're going to use VLANs in a .1Q trunk going up to interfaces on ProxMox, you need to make the interface VLAN aware. But I tried that, and either with VLAN aware on or off, as long as the switch port was tagged, the VLAN still passed. If I tagged a VM, the VLAN went to the right network, communicated on the right network, showed up in all the right L2 subnets, everything was fine. You tag VLAN aware, apply it, nothing changed. So the long and short of that is when an interface is set in VLAN aware, it effectively is creating a, I guess a V switch might be the best way to look at it, interface on the ProxMox host itself. And then what that's doing is acting as an intermediate trunk up to the VM. The VM can then do VLAN tagging within the VM. So you can set multiple interfaces. So one interface could be in VLAN 1, one could be in VLAN 10, one could be in VLAN 11. This is important if you're going to be doing nested validation of things like nested ProxMox or ESX or stuff like that. If you don't have VLAN aware tagged, then what it's doing is it'll pass the tag down to Linux, and it'll pass on just as a native tag. But what you can't do is you can't have multiple VLANs coming from the VM to ProxMox and out. It'll only do one VLAN, and I haven't tried what it looks like or even validated that, but through my reading, that's what I've done. So we're going to go ahead and make this a VLAN aware because we are going to be doing nested labs with ProxMox and some other things later, hopefully SXI too, if I can figure all that out. That's kind of a crazy world right now. We're going to click OK and apply, and nothing should change here. It's just updating it to be that VLAN aware. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to come back over here, and I am going to somehow get that back up on the screen. All right. And again, you guys can't see it, but I'm looking at my diagram, so I have a reference. So the very first thing we're going to do is we are going to set up the CoroSync bridging between the networks. And if we look at the networks, so on this box, PVEC, it should be ENO3 and ENO4 that are the gig interfaces. So we're going to choose ENO4. And in here, we're going to give it an IP address of 10.1.11.12 in a /24 network. All of our lab networks are /24s. We can't set a gateway here because, as I found out, each individual host gets one gateway. And our primary gateway out of the host right now is the 192.168.1.1. I'm going to figure some of that out later because I do think there's some challenges there. But we're going to leave it at that. We're going to name this interface in the comment as CoroSync. I don't know why I capitalized it all. And then we're going to click auto start so it comes up with the node, and we're going to hit apply. The other thing we haven't done here is we haven't messed with MTU on any of these. I'll probably mess with MTU later and jumbo frame the 10 gig interfaces just because we have the ability to jumbo frame across all of that, but we're not going to mess with it right now. So then we've got ENO 1 and 2, and those are so VLAN 12 and 13. We're going to do it in order. So I'm going to go to ENO 1. That's one of my 10 gig interfaces. And I'm going to give it the IP address of 10.1.12.0, the /24. Give it an auto start. And then here we're going to call this backup, replication, and migration. And I'm going to go over all these here in a minute, and even more so when we do the cluster configuration. So nmig. That should be enough for me to do that. And then the final one we're going to do is we're going to go to ENO2, and ENO2 is going to be on VLAN 13, so 10.1.13.12. And I'm going to show you guys another thing that I'm doing here in just a second, and it's going to be a /24, auto start, and then we're going to call this storage and Ceph. So first off, I want to point out every single address here is, other than ENO1, which I screwed up, he should be 10.1.12 as well. Sorry about that, 10.1.12.12. There we go. If you look at all of my interfaces, they are all .12. You can't do this in every environment, and I had already mentioned to you that the reason I chose 12 for the management interface was because it was where I had a low enough number of IP addresses in the block to actually go 12 through 15 and get all of the hosts in. So I've just replicated that across all this. So if I'm troubleshooting and I see something on PVEC1 that's not 12, I'll know there's a problem. If I'm on PVEC2 and I see something under 13, I'll know there's a problem or a misconfiguration. So again, we can't always do this, especially when we're setting up in existing environments, but that's how I'm doing it in the lab, just so we can do it. And I kind of feel like that's best practice if you have the opportunity, but not everything's greenfield. And I also spelled storage wrong. Storage. Somehow needed a 3 in there. All right, and we're going to apply this stuff. So we're going to apply the config. It's going to run. It's going to update everything in real time. And these networks are going to be up and live on this box. So I feel like there's a couple things I need to show you now on the individual host before we get into cluster stuff. So the other day I wanted to add storage. And if we go back to data, or let's just look at this guy real quick. We should be able to see our storage volumes. So if you look, there's ZFS, which is our primary pool. And if we look at overall for the disks as it's loading, should load. There we go. This breaks down all of our actual disks, and then we've broken them down into other components here. So like ZFS, like I said, we have our pool, and this is the aggregate of all of the drives on this. It's actually not the aggregate of all the drives. Let me take that back. Let me go do the detail on this. It's 2 of the 6 drives. The other 6 drives we held, or the other 4 drives, I'm doing a bang up job tonight, we held in reserve for Ceph because our goal here is to make a hyper converged cluster that allows us to actually dive in and do hyper converged network or hyper converged storage on these at some point. And that's going to be another stream, and we'll figure it out from there. All right, so I'm going to pop up my network display over here. But as far as adding other storage, what we want to do is we want to add the backup server now, because one, we want to be able to restore from the backups that we have on the old cluster. That's our ultimate goal here, is to use the backup server for a restoration. And also, as things come up or we bring new units up on this, or new VMs up on the new cluster, we can back them up as well. The good thing is, as you go to add storage, right off the get-go, you have ProxMox backup server. You have all these other options. We'll do one of them in a minute because I think it's important. But let's start with ProxMox backup server. So the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to call the ID is going to be PBS1. And if you can look up here at the top of the screen, that is also what we have named the actual ProxMox backup server. So we're just going to do PBS1. There will be a PBS2 later, and we'll talk about that another point. So then what we have to do here is we have to give the IP address. And the IP address of this box, we can find if we go into ProxMox backup server and we look at configuration of the network. And the network that we're looking here is the already pre-configured 10.1.12.15 network. And this is on that 10 gig interface, Livian VLAN 12. And it's actually the address that we think this host will get later. But we'll deal with that later. So we're going to go in here. We're going to give it an IP address of 10.1.15. No, that's wrong. Should be 14, right? 10. No, I'm way off. 10.1.12. 10.1.12.15. Username, I have a username set up for this, but we're just going to use our standard root credentials that we have for right now. Let me bring up 1Pass and get those. I'm going to do that on the other screen here. Go to Home Lab, and I should have PBS1. Again, these are passwords that should probably be unique across everything, but I'm not worried about that right now. I'm trying to minimize a little bit of complexity. The other thing is I haven't put a lot of thought into what the complexity of the passwords and service passwords should be on here, because these aren't passwords you're going to want to rotate a lot. They should be all private. They should be on all private networks. But again, you probably still want the ability to rotate them without rotating root. So let's go look at the data store. We're going to go back to PBS1, and I'm going to look at the data store. And the data store that we have here, I got to find it. Storage and disks. And if I can't get this easily from here, which I might not be. Oh, it's right there. It's me being dumb. Under the data store, it's backup pool. That's all it is. So we're going to go back into PVEC1, and we're just going to name it backup pool. All right. And namespace is root. This is for all nodes on the cluster, no restrictions. There's a bunch of stuff we can do later. We're setting it up for enable. All I want to do right now is get this up and be able to show you guys. So then we're going to go, there's a fingerprint that you need. It's a server certificate that you need from the ProxMox backup server. And what we're going to do is we're going to go up to dashboard, and under dashboard, there's going to be this link for show fingerprint. And we're going to click that. We're going to copy that fingerprint. We're going to go back over here to PVEC1, paste it in, and then what am I missing? What am I missing? I think I'm missing this. I think you have to do @PAM because that root user is in the PAM side of it. If you're going to do it in the ProxMox side, then there you'd have to add somebody else. And I think you have to use a fully or a semi-qualified name there. So let's do add. Let's see if it works. There we go. So right there you see PBS is VZ dump backup files. That's awesome. It's easy. ProxMox backup makes it super simple. As we talked last time, what I had said is that you also have Veeam that is getting ready to come out with a similar feature within Veeam Backup. And I haven't looked at it or played with it, but I'm hoping that the Veeam integration is this clean. So then if we go into backup, what you're going to do, actually, we're going to go down to the host level, I think. I was just messing with this the other day. Like I said, the beauty of me losing track of where I'm at. All right, here we go. So under PVEC1 now, you'll see that PBS is showing up. And if you go and you look at its backups, it's going to give us a list of every backup it's ever done. So this is all from the other cluster. We're going to get back to that in a minute. But what I want to do from there is I want to show you guys adding one more piece of the storage component. So we had talked the other day about the fact that we need a volume that hosts our ISOs that can be shared. So the ISO store that's native on here, so if you look at local PVC and the ISO templates, we talked the other day, that doesn't actually stretch across the cluster, that's local. Now there was an option in here that I showed the other day on screen for share. It's not what I kind of alluded that it might be, which was something that shared across the cluster. It's the ability to make some sort of share. I don't know if it's a CIF share or what, that you can then map across. But instead, I'm going to stick to what I've done before, which is to use TrueNAS. And under TrueNAS, we have already set this up. And I think it's admin. Could be wrong. Could be wrong again. I have a lot of authorization stuff to get cleaned up when we're done here. So with that said, that host is sitting at 192.168.1.25. And then what if we do, if we go over into this node and we look at how it's mapped in PVE1, this is a little tricky, so I just don't want to screw it up. So we're going to go over here and look. And if you look at the ISO and we do an edit of the ISO, we can see it's that host, it's the username, it's the password. It doesn't break it down into subdirectory. That could be a problem for us a little bit, but we'll just start by looking at this. So we're going to go into PVEC1. We're going to go to data center again. We're going to add another storage. In this case, we're going to call it a SMB and CIFS volume, and we're going to call this ISO. Server is going to be 192.168.1.25. Pretty sure that's what we have set on it. The share, nope, that's not right. Give me a second here. I might have to come back to this later. I don't want to take... Oh, that's NFS. I chose the wrong one. I'm batting 1,000 here right now. I saw that one of you had joined me. I appreciate it. Not sure who it was. It looks like there might be one other viewer on as well. So we're going to do ISO. We're going to do 192.168.1.25. Yeah, I'm sure that's not it. And I think once you screw this up, nope, there it is. Sweet. I was going to say, I think once you screwed this up, it stays screwed up. So there's our share that's on that unit, and we're going to click add. And then we're going to do a quick check of something here. We're going to do try to create a VM, and this is where things usually get a little goofy. So we're going to do test, next, ISO image. There's no ISO here. So this is where this becomes a little screwy. And we might have to go back into this ISO container. And I don't think I can edit it. Let's try edit it. And yeah, you can't add a subdirectory here. So let's go ahead and delete the ISO directory real quick. So it has to have a certain file structure within this share for it to work correctly. So we're going to name it ISO 192.168.1.25. We know the username and password now, so that's all good. I can type it right. There we go, ISO. And this should be template slash ISO here. And we're going to try to add that guy. And then we're going to go back to create VM, test, next. Yeah, and it's still not populating. So we're going to try this one more time, and then we're going to move on. I don't want to slow things down too far with this process. We're going to add SMS. We're going to call it ISO. Share should pop up. ISO. And we're just going to call this template. Add. All right. And then we're going to create VM. Just tell it next. Yeah, this isn't working. So I know for a fact that there's a file structure that has to be created here. As a matter of fact, if we go down into here, I can show you guys. So we can go to ISO, and I can show you the structure right here. So it's template, and then ISO under that. So maybe we'll try one more attempt at this. Maybe it's lowercase ISO I needed, but it creates this structure on its own, and it's causes a little bit of headache if you get it wrong. So lowercase template, lowercase ISO. So last run. If this doesn't work, we're moving on because we're over 30 minutes in and we have a cluster to set up. So add Samba and sifs, ISO. Share. Come on, there we go. And then we're going to do slash template, slash ISO. I'm going to go over to my other screen and just verify that, or that screen even. So under ISO template, okay, so I need the plural out of there, so let's get rid of template, and then ISO is right, and then we're going to do add. All right, final run here. Create VM, next, pull this down. Nope, still not populating. So there's something screwy here. I've dealt with this a couple other times, but we'll figure it out. The share is still good. All our ISOs are there. It'll work for now. So we're just going to delete that, and we'll get back to it later. All right, with that said, let's go configure the other host, because that is the next stage of getting the cluster up. So we're going to go into PVEC2, and we're going to do the same thing here. So interfaces are named different here. So I'm going to, so 0 and 1 are my gigs in this case. And then this S0F1 and, or 0 and 1 are my 10 gigs on this one. So we're going to go to 1, and that is going to be the CoroSync network. And that's going to be VLAN 11. So we're going to do 10.1.11.13/24. And this CoroSync one is super important. We've talked about this before in some of the videos, that CoroSync needs its own dedicated network. So I've given it its own VLAN. I've given it its own dedicated interfaces. I would have preferred to use those interfaces for other things, but right now CoroSync needs those. And while CoroSync doesn't need a lot of bandwidth, it needs to have consistent uninterrupted bandwidth, or things within the cluster will be goofy. So just to make sure we're on path here, I want to jump back over here, and again, it should be 11.12 on this one for CoroSync. If we go look, network. So CoroSync is 11.12. Cool. So that's good. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to do the backup replication and migration network. And that should be 12, and that should be on our first 10 gigabit interface. So this will be 10.1.12.13. Comment on it is going to be backup, replication, migration. All right. And replication, we've talked about in the old cluster, I think. Can't. Oh, did I put that on the wrong interface? Apparently I did. Okay, so I made a mistake here. These top two are 10 gigs. So we're going to go ahead and get rid of this. I messed up, which is fine because we haven't applied anything, and plus we're not in a functional cluster yet. So we're going to okay that. We're going to go back to this. So ENPFS0F0. Okay, so it is these guys that are actually my 1 gig. So we're going to go back to that, and we're going to do CoroSync 10.1.11.13. Core sync auto start. Okay. Okay, now we're going to get into the 10 gigs. So we're going to go to 0, and that is going to be the backup replication 10.1.12.13. Again, this is where having these all set to the same number per host is helpful for the last octet. So backup, replication, migration. So the replication that I was getting ready to talk about right there is replication of the ZFS volumes. So if we have ZFS on one host, we can actually replicate the volumes between each other. That way you get faster backup without actually having shared storage. I want to keep that feature because if Ceph doesn't work well in this cluster, we're going to roll everything back to ZFS because migration has worked incredibly well in the lab, but it's a lab. We're setting Ceph up in it. All right, so the final section is storage and Ceph. That's VLAN 13, and for this host, that's 10.1.13.13. And we're going to say storage and Ceph. And OK. And then we're going to apply this configuration. Yes, we want to apply those changes. All right, and I'm going to bring this over real quick just so we can all kind of, again, see what the final goal was here. I'll end up putting a screenshot of this in with a blog post when we talk about the networking and all that. And again, I keep referencing blog posts. Staticnat.com is where all this is going to live. At some point, it's been my blog for a long time, but we're going to, bring all this up in it at some point. All right, so we'll minimize that for now. So now we have 2 nodes up. They have all of the consistency they need between them to bring things up. I do want to point out again on PVEC2, our networking our volumes look different. Over here we have local and local LVM, whereas on this guy we had local and then we had local ZFS. Because I only had the one disk that I wanted to sacrifice, I just let it come over as an LVM as the boot volume, and the boot volume is also acting as our initial volume for containers and stuff, and that's just short of a terabyte volume that's sitting there. But that's temporary until we get Ceph, and if Ceph doesn't work out well for us until we roll back and do ZFS. And this is also where I had mentioned that I plan on getting getting 2 just solid state 3.5 or 2.5 drives, like 256 drives, and putting them in these boxes just straight to the SATA controller to give me boot volumes. But later, for now, this is what we have. All right, so with that said, we're going to go to the data center side and we're going to go to cluster. And we are going to create a cluster. The cluster name, and I should point out here, this is really important. Once you start the cluster, you can go back into CLI and you can go back into CoroSync configs, and I've had to do this, and you can fix things. In some ways, it's not worth the hassle, but CoroSync is well documented. From what I can tell, they don't use things dramatically out of the normal for CoroSync inside of ProxMox. So any of the stuff that you read on CoroSync should be applicable. There's a lot of good documentation on how ProxMox uses CoroSync. And again, I was able to manually modify files on the first cluster when I did some stupid things, including using shared interfaces, and I broke the cluster. I was able to use the config files to go back and fix it without actually rebuilding the cluster from scratch. But your best bet is to get the cluster right from the get-go. So I'm going to look over here and see what we named it. We named it NMW PVE CL1. I'm not going to use that same one, but we are going to use something similar. We're going to use, let's go here. We're going to do NMW PM CL1. And that should just have left the PVE CL out of it. So we're just leaving the E out of it. We're leaving the PVE out. We're doing PM for ProxMox cluster 1. Gives me enough differentiation that's not a big deal. So then we have a couple links here. And because we've commented them, we know which network is supposed to be the CoroSync one right off the get-go. We're not using multiple links for failover here. We could. It's, again, probably best practice if you're in a data center to have multiple links going out to the same network, split between sides of your network, A side and B side, or between core A and core B, depending on what your network looks like. But neither here nor there. That's what we're doing. The network I just came out of, we would have split between top of rack 1 and top of rack 2, which would have then been dispersed across multiple spines, so in a spine leaf architecture. But we're not doing that here. I have one network switch for now, and that's what we're doing. Later, I think we can come in and add it. So we're creating that. I think it's done. Nope. Just made it on the back. Task okay. All right. So wait for that task okay. That's the other thing. I get jumpy when things hold up, but it always gives you that task okay. All right. And then there is the first node in the cluster. So now we're going to go to data center here. And we are going to go. It's been a minute since I've done this. I didn't rehearse this because I wanted this to all be from scratch and have all the rough stuff in it. Okay, so we're going to go to data center and cluster, and we're going to do join cluster. From here, what we're going to do is we're going to go back to PVEC1, which we're using as the kind of cluster master or the primary cluster node that set up the cluster. And we're going to do join information. And then I'm going to copy that information, which grabs that whole join information section. We're going to go to PVEC2. We're going to paste that. We're going to choose the network again. And it should be CoroSync, and it should be the same network. So 1.11.13, 1.11.12. The peer's root password is actually, I set it up as something different. So we are going to go to 1pass again. And I'm going to do PVE1. Because I told you guys after I did it the other night, you saw me do it live, I was going to change it. And I did. I changed it to the password I had before. So peer to 12. All this looks good. We're going to click join. Login succeeded. It's checking the cluster to make sure they're compatible. And I got an invalid here, which is interesting. So, like we've said before, this is the beauty of doing this live. We get to troubleshoot it. I'm seeing the denied running back here, permission denied, invalid ticket. It shows the node here. I think it worked. Oh, it's a connection issue because we were connecting directly to the host before, and now it's a member of that. So let's go ahead and close that. I'm going to close PVEC2 for now. And I'm going to go back to PVEC1, and I'm going to close that, and it shows both of these guys up. That should be good. It's showing question marks on these. And this shouldn't be here because this doesn't exist on this node. So I'm not sure why that's showing up. And this is bringing PBS across on its own, which is interesting. That should be working. So let's do this. Let's go into PVE1, and we're going to look at cluster commands here. And I don't remember them off the top of my head, so we're going to go to shell. And under shell, and I've told you, a lot of these things are better to run as shell. I am going to go back here real quick. I am going to try to launch PVE2 Advanced. So he's still there, and now he's showing as part of the cluster as well. So that's all good indicators of everything. And if we go to the data center and we look at the summary, it's showing 2 nodes, status is good, it has its minimum core rate. That stuff's all good. But let's, just for the sake of doing it, let's look up ProxMox, cluster, CLI commands. Should have had this up, but did. So if you go to cluster manager, I think the commands are just CM. Yeah, so PVE CM. So we're going to go back into this guy, into the initial cluster member, and we're going to do PVE CM status. And this does have tab complete, it's a little slow. So there we go, 2 nodes, ring ID, highest expected 222. It's showing everything that's good. I want to do the same thing on PVE2. So we're going to do PVE2, we're going to do shell, and we're going to do PVE CM status. And it's going to tell us the same thing. It's going to show it's the local, it's going to show the core rate, it's going to show all this. We're good to go. So I'm feeling pretty good about this, even though we had that little bit of a goof, but yeah, we're good there. So we're going to leave that. We're going to close that down. We're going to close that one down. And then I'm going to go back to PVE1. And we're going to, we don't need that, PVEC1 and PVEC2. Let's bring them back together. Kill TrueNAS here. Kill the cluster command searches. We'll get it clean again. All right, PVEC1. So we're good here. Now the interesting thing is that it's not showing the backup server. And the backup server should be part of the data center configuration. So if we go back and we look at storage, that is where PBS is driven from. And if we edit it, we want it to have both nodes. And I'm not sure why that is doing that. This should have been there. So I'm going to go back, and I don't think I've ever added a node after I've added storage. And like I said, I'm not sure why this local ZFS is showing up, because it shouldn't see that. It's not its local ZFS. But maybe it's just showing up because it's part of the overall data center fabric. All right, so let's go nuke this back up, and we're going to remove it. So now nobody's going to have that. It'll clear out of both of those. We're going to do add ProxMox backup server. We're going to call it PBS1. Server is going to be 192.168.1.15. That doesn't seem right to me. That's not the network it's on. Let's go to configuration. It's actually on 10.1.12.15. So let's go do that. Make sure I'm not missing something here. Yeah. So this is the old one, 10.1.12.15. And that's just making it work across the 10 gig network. Again, sorry for a little bit being a little chaotic here, but 10.1.12.15. Username. Data store is going to be, like we talked, backup pool. We're going to go back to PBS, the dashboard, show fingerprint, copy the fingerprint. And we're going to go back here. We're going to paste the fingerprint. All nodes, no restrictions enable. Root needs to be at PAM, like we talked about. And then add. So this is new. I have not seen this before. So let's go to PVE2 and let's look at its backup. So 10.1.12.13. It has access to the network. I feel like something's not quite right here, but we're going to have to just figure that out as we go. Let's see where we are time-wise. We're right at 55 minutes. We're going to go a little long today. This is the network config. This is all the network interfaces where they need to be. This is storage set up to how it's going to be set up for initial config. That was the goal. But what I want to do here is I want to go into this and show the backups. And what I really quickly want to do is I want to do a backup or just a recovery of one of the hosts. Let me see. So I had a test VLAN, but I didn't back it up, I guess. So let's just bring up Kali Linux. So if we click on Kali Linux and then we do a restore, we're going to restore that and we're going to tell it we want it to, so Kali before, I'm trying to find, it was VM 108. We're going to restore these as their old numbers. We're not going to do a live restore. We're not going to do any of that. We'll mess with that later. I just want to show you guys a basic restore. It's a relatively small VM at 107 gig, and it's on 10 gigs. So this should be pretty quick. So we're going to click restore. And you're going to see it's starting the restore. It's already brought it up. I can close this. And you'll look here, and as we go and jump back into it, it's actually going to show how much it's read and what's coming down. And that's coming from this ProxMox backup server. And we can actually look and see right here that the data pool read objects VM is happening, where it's reading that VM back across. And then if we go back to PVEC1, you're going to see that it's only at what the progress is. It's going to take a while. It's going to take longer than we want to do tonight, is my guess. So we'll close that again, and then we're going to look at the summary here on this host. And we're going to look at the summary of PVE1. And you look, the I/O delay. I/O delay is what usually hits us super hard on backup and recovery on those smaller boxes. The I/O delay does not seem to be a problem right now. The volumes that this is writing to the ZFS pool are all enterprise SAS drives, and I think it's in a 2-node ZFS, so it's pretty performant. We also have a ton of memory on here. If you look, there's 251. We're using 9.2 gig of it right now. CPU, there's 56 CPU cores on this guy. It's not really breathing hard. So we're doing pretty good. If you look, network traffic is holding at 16 megabytes. I forget what that comes out into in megabit. I want to have better breakdown of all this over time, but it is what it is. See, the memory graph's easy. You can see CPU usage spike, and then we'll go look at the Kali restore as well. Oh, and it's already done. So once it got cranking, it was done. So let's do this. We have time. We're going to fire up Kali Linux. We're going to click Start Now. Now, here's the cool thing. This is already set in VLAN 1. You can see we did no config. That's a backup. You can also see that it's booting clean. And there it is. We're already in Kali Linux. And this is going to be on the right network and everything because this was already set for VLAN 1. There we go. So when this comes up, and we can go look at this for a sec. So if we actually go into Kali Linux and we look at the hardware on it, and then we look at the network drive, there's no VLAN on it. And it by default has the 192.168.1, and because it's on the untagged interface, it'll natively talk on it. If I gave it another VLAN, we could easily re-IP this and go on there too. But we're in Kali, and we're going to do ping 1.1.1. Let's close that. Kali gives me some issues when I'm doing this, so ping 1.1.1.1. There we go. So that's a clean restore. It took under 5 minutes over the 10 gig interface, and we're pinging away to the internet. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to, after we end the stream, I'm going to start the migration of everything over. And then I'm going to make sure that we are managing, getting all the services I need up, like the like DNS and all those things in a clean, functional way. And then what we're going to see is we're going to have a live cluster here. I'm still a little concerned about this ProxMox backup that's not loading in, and I don't totally understand it. I think it might be a root password issue here, where I have to make sure they have matching root passwords, or I somehow have to assign the root, and that might be all that is. So if we go to cluster real quick, and then I go to PVEC2. Thing is, I don't really have an option here to do anything like that. I'm going to have to do some digging, but I think if I change the root password between these guys to be the same so they're in sync, I think that solves the issue. But we'll just have to figure that out. So depending on what I find, I'm definitely going to leave a couple of the migration pieces for another one of the streams. I want to show what migrating live services looks like, so I'll probably migrate them and then remigrate them later, so I can have things up and running and test. But the biggest one we have right now is we have the the Kemp load balancer here. The Kemp load balancer is acting as the load balancer between the two DNS servers, so Pi-hole 1 and Pi-hole 2. I don't even have Pi-hole 2 up right now. I wanted as many services down as possible. So what I'm going to be able to do is I'm going to be able to migrate Pi-hole 2 over seamlessly. And by migrating Pi-hole 2 over seamlessly, I can then turn it on, and the Kemp and Pi-hole 1 will live on the old cluster, and Pi-hole 2 will live on the new cluster, but because it's all IP, then it'll still be able to load balance between them, and they'll be able to communicate. The trick is getting the Kemp over, and that is where in most cases what you'd have is you'd have a live load balancer, 2 live load balancers. You just bring up another, you'd migrate one, then you'd migrate the other, all that good stuff. I'm going to play with the live turn up of the Kemp load balancer from a restore. I haven't done that, and we're going to see what that looks like. And then we will talk about service migration in the next stream. And the other thing we'll do is we will bring up the final cluster node probably in that stream, depending on how I feel about the live migrations and stuff like that. Actually, we won't, because we'll want to do the live migrations. And that'll probably be a quick stream. Either that, or we'll do the live migration and we'll do other things while I have the install of ProxMox going on to the final box while we do other things, and then we bring it into the cluster. But anyways, that's it for tonight. We've gone a little over an hour. I thank you so much for spending time with me. Like I said, somebody joined earlier, and even if this wasn't your thing, I appreciate you checking it out. We will have this up and on YouTube hopefully later tonight, since it's not too late quite yet. We started streaming at 8:15 tonight. My goal is going to be to start streaming at 8 on the nights I stream. I'm not really sure what the calendar is yet. I'm working on it. But yeah, that's it. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you actually saw, even through my fumbling, how easy it is to bring a cluster up. And then we'll talk a little bit about the troubleshooting that we did when I get back to deal with like this backup server and the recovery and all that stuff. And as we go, I do want to do one more thing. This is not going to be fast, But what I want to try is I want to see if we can live migrate this Kali instance. And I am going to take this and I'm going to put this in my main window. And I am going to launch Kali. And I know I said we were done, but I want to see what this looks like to actually migrate this. So let's start a ping 1.1.1. And this is also just something we have to do to test the cluster anyways. And I'm a little bit concerned about some of this stuff. So the restored Kali Linux instance is running on the new cluster. It's up and live and pinging. So then we're going to bounce. I'm going to move this all the way to the far side so we can keep seeing it while we do this. Now I'm going to bounce over here to the cluster config, and I'm going to do a migrate. And I'm going to migrate it to PVEC2. Now keep in mind here, there is no synchronization between ZFS, because there's not a ZFS volume on host PVE2. It'll be actually writing to PVE2's LVM volume. And it'll be doing this as a live 100 gig transfer. So we're going to hit migrate. And this is either going to take too long, and I'll go ahead and mute out, and I'll just let the stream finish through the migration. I'll come in and close it when it's done. Or it's going to happen quick enough that we can show it, and then no matter what it does, it may or may not work. Like, again, I'm not sure what this inconsistency is on the cluster with the backup server, but hopefully everything's good enough in the cluster we can do a migration. So here we go. So again, you're watching the live, and the migration had problems. Could not activate storage. And I'm wondering if that's because it's trying to save to the exact same storage. So it failed. Let's see if we can do this again, if there's anything else we can do. So if we migrate, yeah, it only gives us the target of local ZFS. And I think that's our problem here. I think what we're going to have to do is we're going to have equivalent local storage. And I don't. I do not have a local PVE storage that's on, and it's going to want to come across. So I'm going to wrap the stream up there tonight. I will do some troubleshooting and see what I can do to resolve this problem. It might just be that I need to bring up local ZFS volumes on both sides, and then that's going to cause me some problems with our Ceph install, but that can be later. My core thing now is to get the cluster up, show all of you. So what I might have to do tonight is rebuild this cluster, or not even rebuild it, but go in, and if we look at here, I can go right into this ZFS cluster and do create ZFS. And then what we would name it is local ZFS. And then we would call it RAID Z. And it says there's no disks unused, which is interesting because we didn't use but one disk on this. So if we go and look at the disks on this, we used SDA1. We didn't use SDB or C. So I need to understand what we kind of messed up here, what I messed up. Because like I said, this was the holdup for last night, not being able to show you guys everything I wanted to do, and that's why we didn't stream. So if we bring this back up, if we look at local, it doesn't tell me necessarily what those are. If we go look at LVM, so it's using SDA3, and then if we look at the rest of the disks, we still have SDB3 and SDC2, and for some reason they're showing as ZFS, and I don't know why. I probably gonna have to wipe these disks. That's what I'm gonna have to do. because these were part of the previous ZFS volume. And there's probably a whole nother thing we could do, like recovering ZFS and so on and so forth. But that's not what I want to do here. What I'm wanting to do here is I'm wanting to make it very clear what happens when you bring up a new cluster. Again, I'm not dealing with a lot of hardware, so I'm having to do some balancing here to show what it looks like. So then if we go in and we do create ZFS, there we go. So there's our two devices. And I don't know why we're getting that. We shouldn't be getting that. So let's go back to disks. Okay, we got to wipe this disk too. Thought we had already done that. So SDB, we're going to wipe C. Yes, we're going to wipe it. We're going to go a little longer here. I mean, we're only 9 minutes over. This is interesting, right? This is the whole purpose of doing this. So we're going to go to ZFS. We're going to do a create ZFS. We're going to choose both of those now clean disks at 1 terabyte. We're going to call it local-CFS. RAID level is going to be RAID Z. We're going to click create. And this is the interesting part, because it's saying that RAID ZFS already exists across the cluster. And local ZFS, I don't even know why it's showing up. So let's go back to storage. Let's try this. So I want to go into PVE2, and I want to bring up the shell. And I am going to pull up 1Pass. Over here, and I am going to copy the root for it, and then I am going to go into, and I forget whether this shows it live. What I'm going to do is I'm going to run the password command. So I'm just going to run pass wd. So pass wd. I'm going to pull it over here in case I think it's going to paste it clear text. Maybe it doesn't. Yeah, I did pass it clear text, so that's good. I moved it over there. So didn't like that. Let's try it again. Password. And then we're going to right click and paste this plain text. Yeah. All right. So the console's a little goofy in the effect that it doesn't like anything copy pasted in it. So we are going to open up MOBA Xterm, and I'm going to take it to the host, and the session is going to be SSH. We're going to go to 192.168.1.13. Again, that's one of those benefits of having these all lined up so they're easy to remember. We're going to accept it. Nope, I don't want to say the password for root. We're going to do password tpd, and then I'm going to take this over to the other screen to paste the password. So we're going to paste, paste. Okay, it is not taking my password for some reason. Let's copy that again. Paste and paste. Password is unchanged. All right. Well, it is not liking my paste commands at all. So if I type, it's showing up. So password. Okay, let's bring this up, and I'll just view it live and type it. Try not to mutter my root password out loud. Although I just showed it to all of you, so now I got to change it again. I got to love 1Pass that it won't keep things on the same screen. But let's just try it for now. And this is all by private lab anyways. So we're going to do all right. So the password updated successfully now. And then I am going to refresh all of this. Go back and look at the cluster. Cluster seems good. If we go back to the summary, cluster seems good. But we're still getting our shared items across it. This is not clear to me. Again, this is something I did not see on the last cluster. And now I've got passwords and stuff to change as well after accidentally showing you guys the password. So I'm going to spend some time offline so I don't waste any more of your valuable time. And we will come back and we'll talk about this. But we're definitely going to talk about it. This will be what we focus on for the next stream because it's the important stuff. This is what happens when things don't work the way we expect. Again, my hardware is different here. My core configs are a little bit different because the hardware is different. But this is stuff you're going to find in a live environment too. You're going to buy servers 1 year and you're going to set up the cluster. It's going to be clean. It's going to be beautiful. Everything's going to be great. And then you've got to expand that cluster later and it's fully supported hardware, but it's got a little bit different config. Or you have to bring it into the cluster a certain way. And it doesn't work out quite the way you think. The other thing is, we talked about this a little bit the other night. A lot of people are using external storage for this. So they're using 10, 25, 40, or 100 gig Ethernet, or they're using fiber channel, or they're using FCOE, but they're using external. I'm not. I'm using all on host storage, and with doing the Ceph stuff that we're going to do next, after we get all this kind of basic quirkiness worked out, that is what we're going to look at that looks like vSAN or looks a little bit more like Nutanix. We're looking at this way to take local storage and create a distributed SAN across your environment, which prevents you from having to go out and buy any SAN, whether it's EMC or any which pile you choose of SAN or NAS that's out there now. But all right, with that, not exactly as far as I wanted to get tonight, and that's all right. We all live and learn together, and we'll go from there. But I appreciate those of you who showed up tonight. Appreciate those of you who are going to watch after the fact. And with that, everybody have a good night.